Okay, coffee and spontaneity are the spice of life. So let's jump in and see what we can make. I am going to begin with jumping in and grabbing something like a rectangular grid. And I know with that rectangular grid, I get a bunch of things. I get a cool plane, which I could set. I could take that plane out and have it to manipulate later. I think I'll leave it as the default, extracting what it is. Keep in mind, I always keep a panel handy to tell me what things are, and this is the long way of getting around seeing what's there. But if I wanted to change that plane, I could, but at least I know I'm working with one. Size, you could extract if you want, or you could just look. It's 1 to 2, so I'm going to put in a number slider, type in 2, and it'll go from 0 to 10 integers, and then I can just cut and paste that, and I can have a little play off of X and Y and let them be different or make them connected by equation or something like that. Anyway, the thing we're looking at is this grid over here. And I think we'll go into perspective view because that's always interesting. So think what we have here. We got an extent on each one of them, 10 and 10 and 5. So we can change those if you want to. Once again, these two sliders would come in handy. But probably because the extent is more of a rational number, I will go over and make them rational numbers. And I should have done that before I could have just copied one and done that. So try and find the fastest way to do this. Let's take the extent. Now we got our parameters that we can play with and change and move this in any direction we want. Let's start small with the script. I'm probably going to leave this on. Actually, I like to make it so you see everything. That reminds me to take my preview off. So I'm going to go 3 by 3, which is nice and easy. And I'm left with cells, which are made up of curves, which I'm very conscious of, and points, which are made up of points. So I've got my containers, I've got my point containers, I have my cell. What would I do with this? It is data, and how is that data coming in? One way to view it is this way, but you have to know how to read it by those bars. So there's 3 branches with 3 items on each. It's easier just to have a param viewer, and this is the way I come at understanding what's happening in my object. So over here I've got obviously, yeah, the other one was 3 branches with 3 arms, 3 on each things. Now I've got 4 branches with 4 things on each because we're dealing with points, not the line spaces between it. Anyway, we have some data. What can we do with that data? What would be fun to think about? And we could make it all different and move it and things like that. But let's try a good tool to do and get in the habit of doing is just surface from points, and that is not surface from points. I believe I have to go in here a little far. Oh, there it is. Surface from points. I could take those points and bring them in, but I have to match up a UV line of a certain scale that will work with that. So what I sometimes do is just type in the integer value that I think it will be a low integer value, and then I'll make it work by surface coming across it and seeing which one actually ends up making a surface. And there are my surfaces. I believe I'm in. Surface points should be coming up and I should be seeing it, but I don't see my surface from points, which is very strange because it's reading that it has it, yet nothing is coming in. And it could be that I have not taken my points and flattened them. And in flattening them, you see this doesn't work. This makes a surface comes down this row and then flips up and does the next row. It reads that data in a strange way. So as I play with these kind of extends, why is it doing that? Why are the points not behaving the way they should to make a surface? Well, that is not the means to make a surface of these points. It would be much wiser to leave them grafted in their sense of what they actually are, 4 branches in 4, not flattening them, leave them as they were, 4 branches and 4 lines, and simply do a curve interpolated. So you have to think about how you're going to make it. Now there's 4 lines going that way. I can take that data going this way, and I could just loft that into a surface. So loft would be probably my tool, not from points. And there we go. We've got a lofted surface. What is going wrong with that? I have not, in this case, flattened my curves. And when I do that, I get my loft. Now you want to start thinking about this and understand what's happening. And I don't mind showing this because that loft's going to look very similar but they're not. If I flip my matrix and flip my data and went from rows to columns, and say I went over to sets and said, okay, well, let's flip that data. Then bring it into the lines. So the lines are this way, not the other way. And then when I loft it, it would look like a similar surface. But let's think about how that actually changes from this one to the other one. So this one is a way of lofting. And then let's grab this, cut and paste, and loft it this way. Now let's do something in between to show why that matters in the orientation. Let's take our curves, for instance, and do something to them first. So take off this and only be dealing with these curves. And you have your cells. You have them one way, 3 in one way, and 3 in the other way. And there are all your 9 lines. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But let's take that data as cells and think about how I can move it. It might be actually more interesting to deal with the points first before doing this. How can I manipulate those points to manipulate what's happening here? We'll just leave our param viewer and that out of the way. So these points, we could just move them. We could just go up to transform and we could move them in a range, and we could flatten the data so we have all these points. And well, maybe we'll leave it in their non-flattened state. Let's move those points in a direction z, and let's put them through a range. This is what I do so often. I mean, it's just how I think, and maybe I keep coming back to the same things. Let's find a list length of how many's in there. Going to sets, list length is going to be, I believe, 4. We're going to want to move that data up, and we want to move it in, let's say, 12 units in a domain up. Now, once again, don't cut corners. Go into maths, make a domain, and have total control over that domain from 0 to that point. Now they've all been lofted, but there's a double one at the end because we're actually taking 4 bits of data and running it through, lifting it 1, 2, 3. So we've got to go into steps when you have to go into the expression node, and you get very much with ranges in the habit of typing in x minus 1 into the expression node, and that will get rid of that extra object that was there. Now that it's been lifted in that order, let's take a jitter, and let's just throw it through there, and that will mess it up a bit. And there are our lines. Let's throw our geometries into those lines, and then let's take a loft, and there you go. You've got a much more interesting, and let's take that same information, put it in here, and we've got this loft, which looks about the same. I've got this one coming out of that geometry. Now, basically, I don't want to, that data-wise, obviously it's looking very similar because I've just taken the data and flipped it. Let's just leave this one until I can flip the data on. We don't actually have to flip the data. What I want to do is flip the data from these points being 16, 4, and 4. Very interested if I take that data and flip it at this point, what's going to happen in that curve. If I put that flip in there, then take this out and put it here. Now I flipped it that way, and you've got to flip this way. That's what I was looking for. So where would I put in the flip to control that data? So this is really something you want to start having experiments in. So this one's feeding down to here, and I can always grab the move tool and pop it up here, take that geometry, move that geometry in that motion to feed the top one and feed the bottom one. Now I've got 2 of these curves doing something crazy like this. And they're moved, they're not extruded. What happens is, let's say we want to go farther with this and just take one of them, and we would like to treat that shape with the initial shape. So now just thinking what I want, this initial grid, which is technically a plane, we could make those curves. I showed you how we could first of all take those curves and loft those. So I'm just rambling on here, playing around. There it is. So I've got a shape and I've got another shape. And so somewhere between these 2 shapes, what happens when I look at them as surfaces and blow them apart? And I take the edges and I take this edge. This is just another way of doing some cool extrusions. Let's take the edges as a list item, and we're going to want all the edges. And I believe they come out as 4 lines, which are already flattened. And this one comes up with edges being way too many because I've got all of those. I actually don't want all of those. I just want the perimeter of that surface. So there's the loft. And then I want to have not just the loft of all those single points. Let's flatten that one, and we get one shape, I believe. Nope. Let's graft it. I like to say that coffee and spontaneity is the spice of life, but I just can't keep my videos under 15 minutes if I'm not pre-recording them or playing around a little bit. This little object is pretty fun. It's wonderfully parametric in a sense of changing it, and it still keeps all of itself in making sense. You can actually alter not only this, but you can play with, and I've got it set pretty interesting here. I'm going to have to bring it a little larger for it to have an effect because it's just so close to bumping into each other. Uh, I can definitely amplify the Z, which changes it, and I can play with basically that flat surface is all I'm doing and playing with the undulations and the moving of those curves. Now, this is inspired by uh, a cell grid, which is it. I think a square, a rectangular cell grid. So you can change fairly quickly. I'll put up my bifocals. You don't have to use this one. So when you have this form that's behaving like that, and it's completely parametric to its z-axis, whatever you put in here, that's a nice piece of geometry that I can manipulate. And I want to show you how I understand how to manipulate it. I don't need a plugin or app for it. I just need Grasshopper and then all the wonderful nodes that come with that. So let's just go in for interest's sake to get people interested in staying with the script. Let's switch over to something, you know, I'm not sure if hexagonal radial is going to work so well if I put the cells into here and the points into here, but we did change the form a bit. It just seems to be that the size it extends are just a little too small. Let's make it a little bigger and see if this can't adjust it. Let's just bring that in as a parametric model, and there you go. You get something that was inspired and totally different in shape, and I'll take this one off. You can see that I've got this pretty cool script that can behave and operate and change according to the object I actually want to bring in. And that was interesting to see that hexagonal worked. I am interested, obviously square would work with rectangle. I'm not sure if radial will work. That will be interesting to find out, and I really don't know what triangular would do. But let's start with something simple. Go in the triangle and points, and then let's bring up the size, and let's bring out the extent Z, and we've got a totally different one. So that one's being played with, and it's a little stout. I can bring it down in height and see what we're actually dealing with. And then I also want to take off these, it's always tricky to grab these things, take off the preview on that. So basically you have a subtle change of forms based on the, this one happens to be the triangular one. And let's just go for the, and if this fails, we'll go into the script. Let's just put these two in, and there you go. You've got something that's playing off of the size. Let's amplify that as well on the radial. It seems to be working so far. Oh, this is an interesting one. And let's take the extent. So there's a little bit of spontaneity in this. And you can see there I've got, actually I like the extent set differently in number. And you may have to play with this to find out what works and what doesn't work. You might have to amplify it more or less to see what happens. You get these very strange shapes as you go. Radially, it's like, I don't know, the data is kind of changing a little too much. I'm ending up with a strange form that I didn't intend. So obviously that one's not working so well. I'd have to play with that. But, happy enough that the hex grid works. I could stretch it out a little bit into the different extents and see what I have. It crashes at certain points, but certainly the rectangular one and even the hexagonal one work fairly nicely. So I like being able to play with that and make that form. So what do? I bring in whatever I want, and I analyze them as curves and as points. Curves head up here and say, okay, those are curves. I'm not doing anything farther with them, but slide along a param viewer as you go. I'm going to grab those points, which are the edges out of all of those wonderful, every single point that's on each, the vertices or whatever the points associated with that hexagonal design. I'm going to find a list length, which is going to give me a basic number off of how many there are, and I'm going to run that into the steps of a range that I can play with the jitter. I'm moving it up and down, interpolating it into these two sets of curves, up and down into those sets of curves. Very nice and simple. Loft them between. You've got your forms top and bottom. Break apart, deconstruct your BREP. Take your edges, and manually, if you have to, when things start to get non-planar, you may have to slow down and actually start to figure out what these things are, because it's hard to make a surface from that. And I'm pulling these lines from a surface that took all that other information to curve it. Then I had to reverse my curves because they just weren't working out. And as I lofted them together, I was able to get these really cool four sides. And I think those four sides are worth looking at alone, because having control over being able to work that way, let alone extrude these and keep going, you want total and utter control and precision when it comes to your geometry. You don't want any magic happening. The magic is in Grasshopper and Rhino. It's already in the software. So when you're doing things, you want to find out how it works for you and how you can actually manipulate that. Nice little exercise. I'm actually very happy with it. I'm going to put it on there so we can see both and send it to a little tiny turntable. Nice little exercise for the morning. Very happy with it. I'm okay with it, and I've got some pretty cool geometries that I can play with.